Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Marcelo Bernal. Marcelo is currently the Chief Revenue Officer at Briteris, and no doubt has some very interesting stories and perspectives to share. Marcelo, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can get just a flavor of your negotiation experience and when you realized how important negotiations actually were. So we're excited to have you here and take it away, sir.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. So, as way of background, I'm from Brazil. I'm born and raised there. Started in investment banking when I was 19 years old. So I did about 20 years investment banking in Latin America, London and New York. A lot of capital markets and structured finance. So lots of negotiations.
Yep.
From there, I went on to be CFO and then CEO of a payments company based in Atlanta.
Okay.
From there, I started my own company, an AI-powered education technology company, which I exited last year. And for the last probably 2 years, I've been involved with Briteris, helping them with their international strategy and execution.
Wow. I mean, so within that whole realm, you must have had how many negotiations do you think you've been a part of? I mean, is it fair to say maybe thousands?
Probably, yeah,
Wow.
in various different flavors, right?
Yeah.
From smaller negotiations when you're hiring someone to be your chief revenue officer, right?
Yeah.
To multi-billion-dollar negotiations in very complex transactions that I did for when I was back at HSBC or Goldman, you name it.
You know what? Let's actually pivot for a minute and let's touch on that you just said. That's a pretty interesting topic, I think, in the world of negotiations. Is that what do you see as someone who's been part of both the really big ones and the more smaller granular ones? What do you see as a big difference in negotiations between a very large one and a small one? In any angle that you want to talk about it, whether it's time, approach, or whatever, what do you see some of the differences as?
I think one of the big differences is the number of people involved, right? And
Yeah,
obviously, the bigger and the more complex, the more people are involved, which from an outsider's point of view, the higher are the stakes. But
sure.
if you're negotiating someone their package to join your company, it's very high stakes for them. So I think that step one is, yeah, they're all very different. And I think you need to approach each one and try to understand the elements that impact each of the negotiations. But also put yourself in the other side's shoes and understand how high stakes is that negotiation for them. Right. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
you really, you're bringing this along very nicely here. You touched on something that's so centralized and so key in negotiations is putting yourself in the other person's shoes, right? Because in a negotiation, we want to assign value to items, value to things that we have, value to things that they have, and we might not value those the same. So I like that you talked about thinking about what the other side values. And that in your example, the person negotiating to come on your team, that salary is very important to them, right? Maybe has more value to them than it does to you. So how do you try to, in terms of your gives versus gets, how do you try to think about it to make sure that you are, let me rephrase the question. What strategies do you typically employ to try to evaluate what value the other side is putting on an item? Like, how do you conceptualize that?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think that any negotiation, right, starts with a relationship. Right. I think
Yep.
that I've seen countless times when someone goes into negotiation sitting, right, let's sit down and talk terms, right? Whereas you need to get to know that person, right? Because if you're sitting at that table because you both want something, right? And a lot of the times you do want the same thing. You want that deal to get done, right? But you're coming from very different points of view. And In my experience, I think step one is research, right? Try to learn as much as possible about the deal, about the other side, about the people that are negotiating, what's in it for them, right?
Mm,
And really, and also, what's their, which is I think like that the $1 million question is, what's their walkaway point, right?
mm,
What's the point where they say, listen, this is not interesting for me anymore, right?
mhm.
So, and when I remember one of my favorite subjects when I was in undergrad, I did business for undergrad. It was the negotiations class,
Mm,
and the one thing that stuck with me for like this countless years, it is uh, try to understand what is their walkaway point, and what's your walkaway point, right? Because there is a point where you say, "Listen, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to get up and walk away," and the middle point is somewhere in between that. So you have the goalposts, right? And the other thing is negotiations not only is normally not about only one item. It's about like there's several items that you're negotiating, right? So,
sure.
and each one of them is more valuable to you or to that person. So, really understanding what's every single point that you're negotiating, and and rank them. What's really important to me, and what's really not that important to me, right? And try to get to to understand in each one of them what's and sort of try to do a separate ranking
Hmm.
of the level of importance of each of these items to the other side, right? Because then you can start listening. I'm willing to give up this one down here that for me, right? That I don't care if you give me this one that's the most important to me, right? So
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so really, I like how you're creating that exercise of like the things that we value the most, the things that they value the most, or we perceive that they value the most, right? Because in an ideal scenario on both sides, each person would be trading something that is of low value to them, giving away, but receiving high value. And to your point, Marcelo, if you build that trust and that collaboration, you're doing that. Both people can do that, right? In a great negotiation, it is possible that every person could only give away things that are of low value to them and receive things that are high value if we have the communication in the beginning to learn hey, listen, how much do you value this, right? And so have you seen that a lot in your career where you commonly hear that negotiations start with the first email or the first phone call? Have you seen that in your career, whereas the better the relationship, the more transparency, the more authenticity, the more respect, that you end up getting better outcomes?
yeah, I'd say 100% of the time. That's for me. That's like a fundamental rule, right? And I've seen where the negotiators didn't build the trust, and the deal went terribly wrong, and where they did spend the time to go really, and it's not only do it to check the box, but genuinely, right? Try to get to know the other side. Genuinely try to understand their points. Genuinely try to, and what I've seen is that is the more experienced the negotiator on the other side, the more likely it is that they understand and they value the relationship aspect and the trust aspect too, right? So seldom times, and like I've been doing I've done a lot of like investor work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing we tell founders that trying to get new money is you, when you're getting an investor in your cap table, it's a marriage, and no one likes a shotgun wedding, right? So so it is true. It's like it is about building trust, right? And I believe that in like 100% of the times. I like to joke that back when I was in investment banking, we were selling a highly commoditized product to highly sophisticated people,
Yeah.
right? Because truth is, the it was very hard to justify the quality of the work that I was doing at Goldman was very different than the guys at JP Morgan. That's very different than the guys at Merrill Lynch. It's very different, right? So at the end of the day, why would someone choose you rather than the next guy, right? And it all boils down to trust, right? Because at the end of the day, that decision is a career defining decision for that person, right? Either they're doing an IPO, that's going to change their lives, right? Or they're doing their first capital raise. That's going to decide whether they're going to move forward in their careers or if they're going to get fired, right? So it is a very important decision for them. So it's huge. It's extremely high stakes for them, a lot more than it is for us because we did like 10 deals a month, right? So, but you have to be able to understand that side, understand what makes that person tick, right? What are truly those decision variables, right? And build that trust. Because at the end of the day, they wouldn't know if things go sideways, you're gonna be there for them, right? You're gonna do anything under the sun to make it right. And that's kind of like in my mind, that's the essence of negotiations, right? It has to be a win-win-win deal. Otherwise, it's not a good deal.
And right, you bring up an interesting point that like not only are a negotiation that's filled with a quality relationship, not only does it produce better outcomes, but the reasons why it does is because, as you just pointed out, Marcelo, sometimes in these negotiations, the other party is either making a decision that is going to impact their corporate career because they're an employee and it will make the difference between moving up or partnership or whatever. Or if you're talking about M&A, then, we're talking about someone that might be selling their company, right? Which is extremely personal. And so really, if you think about negotiations as having some level of human impact, it seems logical that you would want to have that relationship and not have a shotgun wedding, like you pointed out. We one of our previous guests, who's a LinkedIn influencer, former LinkedIn corporate employee, Sam McKenna. She's great. She has a company called Sam Sales, and one of the analogies that she uses is like the dating world. You wouldn't just walk up to someone the first time you meet them and be like, "Hey, let's go get married." So same thing in negotiations. You got to build that relationship, build that trust.
Yeah, I agree completely. And at the end of the day, I think that anything in life is about relationships, right? And if you build those relationships, right? If you take the time and energy to build those relationships as you're doing negotiation, oftentimes these become relationships that you carry for the rest of your career, right? I mean, there's a number of people that I can pick up the phone and call and say, I need your help, right? And they will stop and listen and try to help, right? Because they know that there was a genuine interest, right, in getting them the best deal as much as getting me the best deal.
Yeah, I think there's been a big push in that everywhere in society, in business and stuff, is authenticity. I think coming out of what the human species went through for the last few years, I think everybody is now gravitating. While we know there's a lot of AI tools coming that are very useful, I think there is this instinctive nature to want to be doing business with people who authentically and genuinely care about us. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of the times, you're not going to have, you're always making decisions with imperfect information. Right. You never have all the cards on the table, right? So the more you trust the person on the other side, the fewer cards you think he's holding back or she's holding back, right? So, and I think at the end of the day, it is about trust, right? It's about truly, and I'll go back to the point that I made earlier, it's about truly understanding what's in it for them, what do they really care about, and how can you make that happen while getting the best deal you can for yourself.
Such a common thread woven throughout these podcasts, because it's so true, which is, giving the other side their victory speech, right? Giving them the ability to go back to whomever else is in their life. If it's a merger and acquisition, maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's a boss, but giving them the ability to go back with their victory speech and say, look what I accomplished. Right?
For sure.
That's a sign of a really good negotiator, getting somebody to give their victory speech. we talk about the relationships, and movies always portray negotiations to be this very confrontational thing, and fists pounding on the table, all this drama. I think probably there are certainly times when a more aggressive approach is needed. But if you had to guess, Marcelo, out of the thousands of negotiations that you've been in, what percentage approximately would you say that there was a favorable outcome in the presence of, call it, tension or aggression? Like, when those have happened, have you seen good outcomes from those or not?
I wouldn't say aggression or tension, but I do believe that the environment plays a big part, right? I mean,
Mm,
I have one story that I think it kind of portrays this really well.
love to hear it.
We were doing a deal for a very highly skilled CFO, right?
Okay.
And there's a number of terms that we had to negotiate through that deal, and the CFO decided that he wanted everyone involved, both business and lawyers, right, to be at his office, right, at 8 in the morning on Saturday, because he wanted the deal completed by Monday morning. And he also had one of the most skilled lawyers advising him, which someone that I've worked with many times, and he's excellent. And they did. We started with like the last complicated issues, but the thing is, this is a week of work that he wanted to do in 2 days, which means that you would be pulling all-nighters twice in a row, right? And he was very skilled at sequencing the whole thing, so that the most difficult negotiations were happening at 4 in the morning on the second day, right? So that everyone's so tired and you're ready to go home. You haven't slept for 48 hours and you just want this to be over. And there is some posturing, right? There is some like body language of walking out of the room, saying like, this, I'm not doing this, right? So I'm going home, and you guys sort it out. So I think there's a little bit of theatrics around it, but these are also people that have had previous relationships, right? So these are people that we've known each other for like 5 years, right? And so when you're sitting across the room from that guy, say that guy's tough, right? So you gotta bring in your thick skin, right? Because it's not gonna be easy. And we knew when he said, "Come be here at 8 in the morning on Saturday," that was going to be one of those, right? But I think there is obviously it's his turf, right? So he was in his office, in his boardroom, right? He had access to his desk and to his personal office to go. We didn't, right? We had like communal, right? So it all creating that level of like that perception, right, of an imbalance, to try to exercise some influence on the negotiation. So I think there is definitely influence, right, of the environment, of the body language, of the posturing, and really skillfully sequencing the negotiation to get the right place at the right time, right? But what I would say is that very emotional, irrational. I very rarely saw something like that, because I think that I think a good negotiation, you try to remove that part of it, and you truly try to be calm, understand the other side, and you know what I mean. So I think that negotiations where you let your emotions take over, they usually don't turn out well for you.
Yeah. So, right. Even besides that kind of like instinctive thing where we have, where it's like, well, yeah, emotions and negotiations don't sound logical. The outcome is really, even The reason that you should not utilize them has nothing to do with the theatrics of it. It has to do with the fact that it just produces poor outcomes, right?
That's
It
been my
just
experience. Yeah.
yeah, it just produces poor outcomes. It's interesting that you talked about that scenario. So, a question about that: you have a lot of negotiation experience and expertise. Um, what was the reason that you decided, you and your team or whoever, why did you decide to go into his home turf to negotiate in that way? Were you in possession? You don't have to say specifics, but were you in possession of information that made you think that that would, in fact, reverse it and put you in an advantageous position?
No, it was the client. He made the
Okay.
call.
Okay.
Sometimes you
Gotcha.
don't have a choice, right?
Okay.
But I think understanding, it goes back to the point that I made earlier about research, right? Understanding the
Yep.
person, understanding how they work, how they think, understanding that why they chose that turf, right?
Hmm.
That kind of puts you in a better position.
It does.
Uh,
It tells you a lot about their personality. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, right. And so ultimately, I think that it does influence, right? I mean, everything, like all the outcomes, but a lot of times you don't have a choice, right? I mean, and either because someone intentionally changed or selected the playing field, right?
Hmm.
So or because the environment is what it is, right? But a lot of the times you are negotiate the other side's turf. And sometimes it is a way of saying, I'm already giving this up. So you
Ah,
start so either start in the right footing. So I think the other aspect that I think is super interesting is try to leverage anything you can in your environment, right, to your advantage. So this is a great example, right? So I'm already giving up the field, right? So you already start with the upper hand a little bit.
interesting. So, yeah, kind of reversing what could perceive to be an advantage to an advantage for you. If you have that relationship with somebody, a statement along the lines of like, "Hey, look, we wanted to show some respect. We came here to your turf." Almost putting them now in a position of disadvantage because they're like, "Well, this person's already showing us a lot of respect. We better do it in kind."
Yeah, and a lot of times you prepare for it, right?
Yeah.
So you say, "Well, we would like to do this in our office." No, 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 no. We're going to do it in my office. All right. So it's very clear. It's very defined that we've given this one up,
Right.
right? So and you put in because at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of psychology that plays into negotiations, right?
Hmm.
And I think back to one point that you made is they need to be able to declare victory, right? When you list all the points, they need to feel like they've won more than lost,
Yep.
right? Or they've won more than they given up.
Hmm.
And so the more opportunities you have to give them that victory, it's in the tally because everyone's taking a tally, right? In that tally, there's one extra point for them, which means that they can give up something else to you.
All very fascinating stuff. I like how you talk too about the sequencing out that negotiation so that the most difficult parts were happening at a time when he might perceive or she might perceive other people to be like, whatever, let's just get it done, right? And then I imagine on your side, you had kind of like backup plans to the backup plans, right? Because when you look at a negotiation that's got a lot of different factors involved, it's kind of like the brackets for the NCAA basketball tournament, right? Like if this one goes awry, what happens to the other ones? And then so it's got this trickle down effect. And so, when you prepare for a negotiation, do you try to do that where you would look at the what we believe is about to be negotiated, how many items, 10, 20, couple hundred, and then try to make multiple scenarios depending on how each one goes? Is that what happens?
Yeah, pretty much. You go for each one of them again, right? What's the best case scenario?
Yeah.
What are we willing to live with? What's a decent scenario? So, what's the great scenario? What's a
Mm-hmm.
good scenario for us that's going to look a bit like a bad scenario for them?
Mm-hmm.
And what is a what we are we willing to live with? And where's our walk away? Right. So I think for each one of them, as you're preparing for a good negotiation, you will look at all these scenarios, right? Because the best outcome is something you can live with and looks like you gave up a lot, right? Because you buy that leverage for the next point you're going to negotiate, right? So there's always some headroom as you. So I think it's important to always build in some headroom in your negotiations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it looks like you're giving up, but you're actually okay with it. And some things you just don't have room for that, and that's going to be a real negotiation to the last point, right? But I think that it goes back to research and preparation, right? I think that the more you know, the better our chances of a good outcome.
Yeah, because it's interesting. If we have, for sake of argument, if we have 50 items that we think we're going to be negotiating on, and we rank them in importance, and then each one of those 50, we assign a value that would represent our goal, our, kind of we're okay with it, or our walk away. The interesting scenario becomes, okay, we know if the top 10 all reach our walkaway point, the whole negotiation is over, right? We can't lose our top 10 to the worst possible outcome. What are your thoughts on, let's say we're more down towards the middle of the end, so call it numbers 35 through 50, and we start seeing a lot of we're really at the bottom range of where we want to be. What are your thoughts on trying to raise those bottom ones up? Are we now taking a little bit from maybe we had a few on the top that were our absolute best case scenarios? Are we trying to bring those back down, or more focusing on those bottom items?
I think it depends a lot, right? Because I think that a lot of the times you have those top 10 items that are deal breakers, right? And if you've gotten that, a lot of the stuff at the bottom here don't matter, right? Because
it's gravy.
It is extra, right? So, and a lot of the times, what was more often than not is you've given up 5 of these to get one of those ones. You've given up another 10 of these to get another one of these, right? So, and that's happening on the other side too. That's why I was like, it's important to understand what that ranking is for both sides, right? Because what ends up happening is that one of our bottom ones over here could be all the way up there for them, right? And there's a win. So more often than not, and sometimes it is just for the tally. So okay, or sometimes it's because it truly makes sense, right? So say, well, we're agreeing to give up this facility, right, that we have in Texas, right? Because we're gonna get a distribution agreement here in Europe. You know what I mean? So sometimes it is a real trade-off. That is, so listen, okay, now you're gonna let me distribute throughout Europe if I stop producing this in the US, right? So sometimes a real trade-off is like that economically is better, right? But for them, this is a competing product in the US, so that's a deal breaker for them. Does it make sense? So
it does.
So truly understanding the other side allows you to kind of do those trade-offs, and it becomes it is an art that's got a lot of science in it, right? It's not people say a lot of our science. I think it's both, right? And it's being able to use the science in favor of art. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
It does. Yeah. And you actually stole one of my questions. I was going to ask you about that too. So it's perfect. Yeah. And so, people you hear a lot of opinions on that. And I want to actually back up 1 second though, and just say, I think that a lot of general society, when they think about the concepts that you just talked about, giving up a facility in Texas for X, Y, and Z, you can only do that if you know what the other side not only values, but what they need. I think a lot of society, when they think of things like major league trades, right? NBA trades or NFL trades, where you've got these teams, that are trading between 4 players because one needs a point guard and the other is not, or draft picks for future. How much do you value that? What do you have in the pipeline? So I think what's really interesting is the connection between these corporate type negotiations and what people are seeing on ESPN every day. A lot of similarities.
And on the negotiations they see every day, right? Because I mean, that's like you negotiate every day, right?
Right.
Everything that you're doing. I mean, and if you stop and pay attention, right? You are negotiating everything on your life. So being able to understand, apply some of these concepts to your everyday life, right? I mean, I'm negotiating whether I'm going to increase my rent or not, right? So,
Hmm.
what can I talk to my landlord to sort of like, okay, don't increase my rent, but I'll do a renovation here that I'm actually going to benefit from, right?
Right.
Right. So like, you know what I mean? So which is kind of the same Europe versus Texas, right?
Yeah.
But I think that these are super important concepts, and I think that people that do apply it, they kind of get better outcomes in everyday life too. You know?
It happens so much to all of us. You're right. That's a perfect example. Your rent, like, yeah, well, instead of increasing the rent, let's do this renovation, which I get enjoyment from anyway. And the landlord in that scenario would get long-term value, but I'm getting short-term value while I'm there. And depending on what it is and how much I value that, that makes perfect sense. In that world of art versus science, so you had talked about you feel like it's a healthy mix of both, right? I mean, I've heard some people say really heavy on the art, really heavy on the science. Am I understanding right that you think it's about equal depending on the circumstance?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's about equal. I think that it is an artful use of science, right? So
Okay.
there's a lot of data. I think the more data you have, the more knowledge you have, the more research you've done, the best prepared you're gonna do. But also, you gotta understand. So like feel the moment, right? So
Mm.
feel the body language. See, well, is this resonating or not? And maybe you have to change strategies, and you need to be able to skillfully be able to do these trade-offs, right? Understand, say, what can I give up, what can I give up, right? So I think that it is a healthy mix of both, but it's not 50-50. I think they're completely integrated.
Yeah. And probably what you were saying earlier, too, is no two negotiations are the same. You probably see some where you're able to use a little bit more of the art versus the science and vice versa. Is that a fair statement? Depending?
It is. I think
Yeah.
so. I think so. And again, is it about relationships too, right? So
Hmm.
I think a lot of the art comes into the relationship, right? I mean, how to build that relationship, how to communicate trust on someone that is clearly on the other side of the table, right? So how do you bridge that gap, right? And reach the middle and start that negotiation like that.
You had mentioned in the beginning in your intro, and if you could remind the listeners, you either are or were part of something to do with AI. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I started a company that teaches English to artificial intelligence in developing countries.
Oh, okay,
And
great.
yeah, so I run that company for a few years, and I just exited at the end of last year.
Okay, awesome. Well, because I want to talk about AI in terms of negotiations. Now, the disclaimer for all of us is that what we know about AI right now in this podcast could be different in 5 minutes when we get done the podcast. So this is only your opinion, Marcelo. But where and if at all do you see AI as having value in a negotiation?
I see a lot of value, especially when
Okay.
you go into um, sort of augmented reality, right?
Hmm.
If you think about, let's say you're doing a negotiation, you've already met with the person, you've already established the relationship, and you're doing the negotiation via video,
Hmm.
right? Um, there's a company that I know that is developing an AI model to identify the veracity or the genuinity of the person on the video, right?
Okay.
So you can start AI can start helping you figure out, oh, I think this guy's lying, or I think that I don't think that's that important to them, right? Because if you say something is important to you, I'm going to say it's important to me too, right? So I can sell it at a higher price to you. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think that there's a lot. It's still in the early stages of that
Yep.
technology, right? But I know that these guys are developing amazing models to be able to sense or to identify, right, changes in behavior or you know what I mean? So, or like they're touching their face too much. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I think that's one aspect of it. The other one is, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think negotiation is all about research, about how much do you know, right? And
Hmm.
I think the AI and generative AI can really do a much better job at researching than you going on Google and trying to find out who is this mass Despins, right? So
Right.
so I think that more on a on a supporting role, if you want to call it,
Yeah.
than on the main stage, right? So I think AI before people make decisions or allow AI to do the negotiation, right? I think there's going to be a lot of AI as a support to the negotiator that's there in front of the other party.
Yeah, I agree because first off, fascinating about the kind of facial recognition, body language, veracity, authenticity, right? That's fascinating. I can think of one whole industry that's going to go out of business instantly. You have people that are playing online poker, through video, right? Like, I mean, sometimes it's just clicking buttons, but sometimes it is on Zoom, and that whole industry would be in trouble there. But right, I think AI. I know AI is really good, to your point, Marcelo, of quantifying large sets of data and finding patterns and really disseminating topics, or I should say themes, that might otherwise take a very long time for us with a human brain. So I agree with you completely that we're always going to have to, presumably, although Walmart is trying a different strategy of negotiating only with AI, but the vast majority of negotiations for a very long time are going to require a human component, I believe. But to your expertise and point, to really disseminate that large info is really something that cannot be, the value of it can't be overstated, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think that as I think I mentioned before, uh, I think there's a huge human component to negotiation, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge relationship component to negotiation. There's a real huge trust component to negotiation. So and I don't think that the technology as we see today is able to replace those things. So I see technology making us and AI making us a much better negotiators as we know more. But also negotiations are going to be much harder because the other side is also going to know more, right? So
Right.
uh, the tendencies to sort of like it will help us, but I don't think that in our the foreseeable future, I don't see AI truly replacing humans, especially in more complex negotiations. I think that when you start thinking about like vendor processes and things like that, where it ends up being about price and ends up being about like five elements. Maybe AI today can do, right. I don't know how Walmart is using that, but uh, I'm suspecting they're not using for their acquisitions, right? In the M&A team, I think they're so. I think there's still a long road to feel like AI is going to replace the human on complex negotiations.
Yeah, and I think, how many other times have we seen this in life with everything, right? Where something new comes along. Some people think it's going to do everything. Some people think it's going to do nothing. Where does it almost always end up? Somewhere in the middle, right? And so this probably will be the same, that AI will present challenges and negotiations, but it'll present opportunities and benefits. And the key is who's going to be able to embrace those to maximize their value versus who's not. And I think that'll be one of the main differences. So in wrapping up here, I want to hear more about what's going on over at Briteris, not only kind of what they do, but also your role there and any other exciting things that might be happening that you want to talk about with your team.
Of course, of course. So Breer is a nearshore technology partner, so end-to-end technology partner, meaning that
Okay.
we're an outsourced development shop,
Okay.
and we have about 1,000 developers, primarily based in Brazil.
Wow.
So
Okay.
when you think about offshore development, right, the first thing that comes to mind is low quality, low cost. Thanks, but no thanks. I've tried and it didn't work, right? And knowing this, the founders of Briteris 15 years ago decided to follow a different strategy, and they decided to focus on high performance development. So, the average developer that we have is about one notch better than a developer that you would normally hire in a regular process in the US.
Okay.
So, but because they're based in Brazil, they still come at a fraction of the cost. So when you think about like there's a lot of concerns about like the economy and hiring freezes and budget cuts, right? We enable companies to still keep up with their development plans, but and still cut the cost, right? And have, because we are now post pandemic, we live in a remote first environment, and as if you know any developers, they are okay being on their own, working from home, right? And
Yeah.
there's what we found out is that they were like most successful, right?
Always. Yeah.
In a remote first environment. So
Mhm.
for our clients, if they close their eyes, their developer could be in Midtown Atlanta, in Midtown New York, or in Midtown São Paulo, except that they are 60% of the cost. Right? So the company is being hugely successful started in Brazil, then branched out to Latin America, and over the last 3 years, we've started expanding into the US and being highly successful with that.
Well, this is something that Marcelo doesn't know to our listeners. So this is going to be brand new information to him as well. But what he just said actually resonates with me a little bit. And I can verify this because one of my best friends in the world actually is a developer in Rio, and extraordinarily talented. He speaks 4 languages. Now, I don't know enough about coding and programming and developing to speak intelligently about those parts, but I can tell you that I know he's incredibly sought after by a lot of people because he's so skilled. So what Marcelo was talking about is, yeah, that impression of, an out of country developer, low cost, low quality. I can say that not only in looking at Briteris's website, which I am right now, which looks amazing, but even personally, I know somebody who is smarter than a lot of other people I've met here in the States, and he's sitting right down in Rio, phenomenal. So I've been to Rio and Sao Paulo a few times myself, and I can say that I've met so many incredibly intelligent people. So to Marcelo's point.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the truth is, we have a very unique business model, and the practical result of that is if you look at overall churn for outsourced shops like us,
Yep.
it's about 35 to 40%. In-house technology churn is 12.7% in the US. Our churn is under 3%.
Right. So in the US, it's 12. Did you say yours is under 3?
Under 3%.
Just so the listeners heard that, you're talking about, and please correct me if I'm wrong, your developers that are working with Briteris that are down in Brazil, less than 3% of them are churning. In other words, they all like working with you so much that they're staying with you. Am I understanding correctly?
That's correct. So what ends up happening, because we focus on high performance development and we have such low churn, a lot of the projects we end up getting from our clients are the highly strategic projects that needs to be completed on time, on spec, and on budget. And we've been extremely successful applying that strategy throughout Latin America and now in the US. So if there are any listeners that do need high quality developers, I'd love to get a call.
Yeah, I got to say, in hearing this, I would be fully supporting this. Just to break that down a little bit, in case maybe there's a medium sized business, what exactly what skills would a developer bring to their business?
So what we've seen, a lot of the clients that we talk to are companies, technology companies that are in rapid expansion.
Okay.
Right? So what ends up happening is that they increase sales or they got an investment from an investor, right?
Yep.
And all of a sudden they need to hire 25 people into the technology team. the playbook is they will hire the first thing that comes to the door, and they have an 80% churn, right?
Yep.
What we do is we establish long-term strategic partnerships with our clients, so that as the changes happen and the growth happens, because our team, we have 1,000 people on the bench. One
Pause. Did you say 1,000
1,000 people,
with
yeah,
a 2.5 or 3% churn? Just for everybody listening,
that's right.
a lot of teams can't keep 10 people happy. Briteris is doing it with 1,000. Okay, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, so because we do have 1,000 people, there's very little we cannot do. And my recruiting team alone, I think, is 25 people. So if you need to hire 25 people, we're much more likely to be able to find the right people at a much shorter period of time than you would if you try to hire them yourself. The other thing, and I like to put a point on this, because everyone's like, well, but how do you, is this magic? How do you guys get to that, right? And I think this I like to explain this because that kind of tells a lot of our story and our culture, right?
Yep.
Typically this outsourced development shops, they employ a individual contractor model, meaning that there's, if you need a developer, I'm gonna go contract somebody and then place it in your company. So other than my logo on their pay slip, there's
It's
very
them.
little loyalty to me, right? Because we wanted to focus on high performance development. That middleman model didn't work, right? So when we started the company 15 years ago, we decided that we would make everyone full-time employees, right? So and we decided to build a strong software development brand, right? So if someone was looking for a job in technology, right, they could go to a Facebook or Amazon, right? But if you don't like what you see there, guess what? You're gonna have to go find another job, right? With us, right, you can work in projects as exciting as the ones you would work at Amazon or Facebook, right? But if you said that this is not for me, guess what? You get transition out of a project into another. So we focus a lot on our culture, right? So we're best places to work, great places to work for as long as we can remember. Very high rating on Glassdoor, and everyone that walks in the door, is a full-time employee, full benefits. So the whole 1,000 people are full-time employees with full benefits. And more than that, everyone that walks in the door has a career plan that lends you to a partnership. We today have 29 partners that run the company. And especially in a developing country, having line of sight to your retirement, it speaks volumes, right? And that career plan is all training based. So because we invest a lot of time and energy in hiring right and training those resources, and only 3% churn every year, we are able to consistently provide a higher quality talent than anybody else in the industry. And that's proven by, you can talk to any of our clients. We develop for about 100 clients every year, and you can talk to any one of them, and they'll tell their experience.
I'm absolutely blown away. Those numbers are staggering in any industry, anywhere. But everything, the fact that there's 1,000, they're full-time employees, there is a retirement trajectory set up for them. I mean, that's phenomenal with the 3% churn and the high ratings on Glassdoor. I mean, I think any company who's not utilizing Briteris, I mean, it's not. We talk about emotions not producing optimal outcomes, right? Sure, you have a choice to use Briteris or not. It sounds like not using them is probably not your optimal outcome. And I will say I can personally attest to the fact that having spent time in the Brazilian culture, both in person and one of my best friends, that lines up with what I know. I mean, I've always found when I'm down there, the kindest people, really good work ethic, very genuine folks. And so what Marcelo was saying lines up perfectly with my own personal experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, and as you know, Brazil is the largest country in Latin America,
Yep.
and so it is also a very deep market, right? And I think that we're in that sweet spot where we're big enough that we can grow with our large enterprise clients and our mid-sized clients and enterprise clients, but also small enough that you can still get a direct line of sight, like non-communication to me or to the owners of the company, right? So we value relationships a lot, right? We value strategic relationships a lot. And I mean, one of our first clients, a lot of our first clients are still with us today, 15 years later, right? Because they see the value in that partnership. And again, goes back to trust and relationship.
Well, to everybody listening, definitely give Marcelo a call. It's Briteris.com, and it's Marcelo Bernal. You guys will be able to see that too when we release the clips. But it sounds like you should reach out and at least have a conversation. So with that, sir, do you have anything else to add in closing?
No, that's it. I think it's a pleasure being here, part of the podcast. And yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone that wants to talk.
It was absolutely our pleasure to have you. Thank you, sir.